This episode is brought to you by Encore Business Group, Ericola Aesthetic and General Dentistry, Williams Chiropractic, Elite Winning Solutions, and Sal's Complete Home Painting and Handyman Services. Shayne Graham's Extra Points with Ron Walsh airs live Thursdays, 7 to 9 p.m. Eastern on Jethro.fm.
Happy New Year. Appreciate you joining us in the new year here. Appreciate your support in last year and hope that the holidays went well for you here. And we're hoping to kick off the new year in a good fashion for you here. We've got some football coverage, but Shayne and I have some talking to do about what our coverage is going to be going forward too. So we might even do some of that on air. As a lot of the listeners know, I'm an Indiana alum. So if you're watching that game, I'm happy about that. But I'm happy, Shayne, that they're blowing that they're blowing the game out right now. I don't really have to pay attention. It's 38-3. I have it on my iPad. I know you can't see it, but
all my friends are throwing the meme from Rocky IV. Throw the towel. They're all throwing that around in my group chats.
I love that. Well, okay, so you clearly have your group is clearly has an overlap with one of my main interests outside of sports, which is action movies. Yes. Because you mentioned the Rocky movies over the holidays, and we talked about Die Hard being a Christmas movie. Yes. I watched Die Hard on, I think, December 26th.
I did not get a chance to watch it this year, but it doesn't mean I'm not going to.
Well, there's always time, and I figured I'd kick off the Christmas. I'd do it during the Christmas season and then watch the rest of them, at another time here. Now I can watch the rest of the Die Hard series. But yeah, we've got a lot of different things to discuss. We do celebrate the thing of the day. Obviously, it's New Year's. There's resolution themes to that. It's also Polar Bear Plunge Day. And I just left Shayne outside in the cold because I didn't see his text, and he was freezing out in the cold snow there. But I was researching this because the Special Olympics apparently does like a polar bear plunge challenge in like the February timeframe, at least in Michigan. And I was looking this up, and I think I'm going to try to register for the polar bear plunge that's at LMCU in Grand Rapids here in February, because I am very cold blooded. I'm or warm blooded, I guess, as it were, as far as like I don't have a coat on when I come into studio in this kind of weather. And but that's the theme of the day. I don't know how to involve that with our guests. Like, would you take a polar bear plunge? What about you? Have you ever did you do cold therapy or anything? Was that something when you were
I would
playing?
Do cold tubs all the time. And there's actually a term used in psychology called sensory adaptation, which is, it's used in physical and psychology. So basically, it means when you feel a sensation, the more you feel it, the less effect it has on you. So it becomes incremental. So one of the biggest things is when you get in cold water, after a certain amount of time, your body gets used to what that temperature is. So it feels like the water has gotten warmer. I mean, we experience it every time we get in a swimming pool, right?
Sure.
You can actually do that when it comes to getting ready for the polar plunge. So if you go do an ice bath every night and you just fight it out for however long you do it, you'll notice that each time you do it, you'll be able to go a little bit longer, a little bit further, a little bit colder, however it may be. And by the time you do the polar plunge, you should be in a better place if you've actually put a little routine with intention to try to get yourself ready for that.
I can see that. That's kind of where I'm at with it, because have you heard of a guy named Wim Hof? It's kind of an obscure reference, but he's an adventure guy that started to train in extreme circumstances. So he kind of doing what you're doing, what you're talking about. He would do marathons barefoot in the cold in the mountains of Poland, and he would do all these crazy challenges, and he developed some breathing practices and some things to prepare your body for the cold. And I started doing that and doing his cold shower routine, which kind of got into that. Dan's nodding his head. He might know this one here.
Well, no, I know who Wim Hof is, but I was actually going to ask Shayne, in like the fitness influencer space, if like you see stuff like that, like cold tubs, like have become like a daily routine for some people. Would you see a benefit in any of that, or is it more of a therapeutic thing in your experience?
So, I mean, the whole point of that is it's like when you put ice on an injury. It's supposed to remove inflammation, lactic acid, things like that. It constricts and dilates and creates like vasodilation of your capillaries that run through all your muscles and all your fibers, and it expands and contracts and expands and contracts, and it's supposed to push out inflammation. So there's, ever since, the Roman baths and all that stuff, it's been a thing. I always did it because I felt like I liked it. I would do the contrast, hot to cold, and I would usually finish with cold on a post practice, and I would finish with hot before practice. So I always felt like it was part of my routine. I always did it and believed in it.
So why did you go with those two the way that you did, finishing with cold after the practice and then hot before the practice, if I get that?
Because the cold constricts circulation, and that's kind of like pushing out inflammation, and the warm inhibits the circulation, which then invites more
that makes sense.
Blood flow.
Right.
So when you get ready to go out on the field, you'd prefer to be warm.
You want a warm muscle.
Than all cold and stiff.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah, I've been kind of following those because now you got the sauna thing that's involved too, and that's kind of one of the more fitness influencer kind of things that's going on, in addition to the hot tubs, cold tubs, all of that kind of stuff. I feel like there's got to be use for all of them, but all the people in the individual spaces probably exaggerate the individual benefits of it. It's like it's nice as kind of an arrow in your quiver.
If like some of it might just be building mental toughness of doing something you don't like every day. But the other one I've always seen is, you said you bring up those, is a few of them are very big on getting out in first light, getting your body exposed to like the sun in the morning. Okay. I'm not sure. I don't know the science behind it, but I have seen that as like, if you want to try 5 health hacks, cold tubs, the sauna, first light, getting out and getting in touch with the sun. I'm supposed to do something for your circadian rhythm or something. I don't,
I have heard that. I do have a friend that has like, I don't know what it's called, like a happy light or something, where it's supposed to simulate that in the morning, where you like turn it on and you're not outside, you're inside in a blanket or whatever.
I mean, I know there's a lot of this red light therapy that's out there now, and they talk about, everything from vitamin D to whatever. It's supposed to help with, depression. So I guess that's why they call it the happy light.
Right.
I mean, all that stuff is out there. Who knows? I mean, it's like every time a new trend comes out, you see an influencer or a celebrity or an athlete doing something. All of a sudden, everybody's doing it. You might remember in one of the Olympics, Summer Olympics, Michael Phelps had all these suction cup hickey looking things all over him, and all of a sudden that stuff blew up. But it had been out. I'd seen that for years and years and years and years. But all of a sudden you have a swimmer who's shirtless, and you see all those suction marks. Cupping became like this big, huge thing, but it had been around for forever.
Well, that's probably a big difference. You probably have seen so many more things, or at least seen them earlier than people like Dan and I have, because we had this conversation when we were talking about Matthew Stafford and his durability over the course of his career, and you were mentioning how high-end athletes like that often, obviously they've got to work at it, they've got to do a bunch of different things, but it's the idea that if your budget increases and your body is your payday, essentially, at that point, then you need to invest in your body and keeping your body at tip-top shape. And him being able to invest in his body is maybe a little different than us, trying to find those hacks that we're talking about, getting the happy light for $15. For sure. I remember a headline once upon a time that LeBron used to spend, it's probably more now, $1 million every season to keep his body going. And although that looks like an exorbitant number to the lay person here, he's also making $50 million plus a year, and he's lasted long enough where he's playing on the same team as his son. So clearly something's
he's
working.
on the same team. I don't know how much he's playing.
He did play the other day. I was watching the Pistons game the other day, and I saw Bronny Jr. number 8 out there with LeBron, which was funny. But yeah, I think he's been in the G League most of the time. To your point, Shayne. But I'm wondering if there's kind of some things you talked about, kind of the routine. Did you see some things, because now you train young athletes, young kickers, young punters, and you probably want to pass the former athletes that I talk about that got into the health space. Zach Zenner is another one, the former running back for the Lions, that they talk about basically taking some of the things that they learned and then building on them, and then you're still at the forefront of it because you're still seeing this. You went into coaching and then you saw it there. Are there any things that like kind of came out later that you've seen as advancements, or it's all kind of like, hey, no, that stuff that's been around for a while, those are the things that are kind of the tried and true rehab things?
Well, you're starting to see technology play a role in it as well. The cryotherapy, like the things like that. One of the biggest things that I have to tell to especially a lot of my new clients, whether they're in high school or middle school, is a lot of guys just show up to the field, they sit down on their tail, and they start stretching their legs out. It's one of the most outdated ways to get ready to actually perform. Really, that does not do really that much for you. It might feel like it is because you're quote unquote stretching your fibers out and lengthening them. But if you do that cold, it's actually bad for you and can lead to injury. So I think there's more of a push now for ballistic to kind of more dynamic movement, where you go into a certain set of movements that are promoting blood flow to the muscles you're trying to warm up. And that allows those muscles to lengthen naturally. And then you stress the range of motion with the movements that you're doing. So then you're naturally stretching them out, and you're actually prepping them and keeping their activation with the neuromuscular connection with your brain, so that your nerves can send the signal to perform. When you just cold stretch, that pain actually sends a signal that says, ow, 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 turn off, defend. Like it pulls back. So it's a new thing that a lot of people are, strength coaches are kind of figuring it out, but yet you're still always going to see the formatted, everybody in lines across the field, stretching, all that. And I think that's just because head coaches love the way it looks. It's very kind of militaristic and, parade line looking type thing. But every single player that's out there during those stretch lines, especially in the NFL and college, more than likely have already gone through a big routine to get themselves ready. It's almost just for looks at that point.
Which it's funny that that's basically just for appearance, and they have to go through their own separate routine. It's like you think it would behoove the team to kind of get something that's a little bit more dynamic. Is, I mean, you could still do that as a unit,
and they usually do it in positional groups. And the strength coaches usually take groups of guys and go through different things. Like let's just say pregame for a football game, you'll have the kickers are usually the first ones out. They've already gone through their stuff. Then the quarterbacks, then receivers, and whoever else comes out, and the linemen are always the last. The strength coaches have already kind of gone through some stuff with those guys, but then when the whole team comes together and they break out into these big stretch lines, it is truly just so the coaches can have everyone and know where they are, and they can walk around and say, good luck, go get them today. You got this, whatever. And it's almost like a ritualistic / superstition for a lot of these head coaches, just to be able to give everybody on the team a high five before the game.
That makes sense. I've never heard it explained that way, but I know there is some lining up for intimidation in some of these sports, because if you think of like rugby and like the New Zealand team with the haka, and doing that before the game, and they get all intense. But yeah, I don't think any football teams are intimidated by like, oh, those guys really look like they're in good formation here. Yeah, we're worried about them. So it makes sense as a more traditional angle and something that carried over from the old days. That's an interesting conversation. Yeah, those are the types of conversations that we want to have here with with Shayne moving forward, especially in the off season, about getting the body ready, a lot of the off season preparation and all of that kind of stuff. So we'll take a quick break and probably talk about the college football playoff a little bit after we come back. And I want to ask Shayne about some of the kicking stuff that's been going on in the college football playoff, because every time I see something about kicking, I think of Shayne now. But there's been a lot of kicking tightness here in the college football playoff. It's got to be a tough environment for these young guys. So we'll come back after the break and talk with Shayne about that. Stick with us. You're listening to Shayne Graham's Extra Points on Jethro FM. But coming back here, it looks like Indiana finished. I didn't see what the final score is, but they definitely won, unless they somehow rattled off 40 points while we were on air there. I'm sure that didn't happen, but they're in the post game now. But I wanted to talk to Shayne about some of the stuff going on in the college football playoff, because there's some interesting storylines, and we'll cover some of them. We've got Robert Bondy coming on at 7:30, and we'll talk some college football with him. He'll talk some Michigan State and probably want to talk the college football landscape as a whole. But I'm curious, if I don't know how many games that Shayne caught, but there was a lot of kicking issues in the college football playoff. And I know we had a conversation early on in one of your first interviews with the show where we talked about how there's differences between kicking in college and kicking in the pros. So I'm wondering how you have kind of taken this in, watching some of these guys struggle, because obviously you can relate to them better than anybody. And I don't like it when people, you want your team to win, but these are young guys. I want to give an explanation for people, because it's a lot harder than it looks, for one. And two, one thing that stuck out to me that I never followed up with you on is that you talked about college kicking being more difficult in a lot of ways, especially for a younger guy that's still learning to kick, learning the nuances of the game and all of that. So I'm wondering how you've kind of taken some of this in with a college football playoff and a guy in a pressure spot with these kinds of kicks.
Well, so many of those guys are just very physically talented. Many of them, and I can include myself, when I was in college, we were still learning our craft. We were still trying to perfect what is the perfect swing, what is the perfect, tempo, how hard am I swinging, and I think you look at anybody in their 18 to 23-year-old age range, their frontal cortex is not fully developed, their brain is still maturing, and they're still trying to figure out a lot of things in their life at that time as well, and they're getting all these coaches from around, all these gurus from around the country, literally hitting up their inboxes on social media, trying to be the guy that coaches them so that when they make it, they can attach their name to it and take credit for them, basically. So there's so many things going on in these guys' heads, and they're trying to keep their grades good. They're worried about their girlfriends. They're, all the things that are running around through their head. Unfortunately, I saw the kid from, I can't remember what school he played for, but he won the Groza Award, and then he missed a couple big kicks in their bowl game or playoff game or whatever it was. I can't remember, but it was unfortunate. I don't know that the guy missed hardly anything all year long, and then all of a sudden he comes up missing a couple kicks in that game, and it's very unfortunate. But some guys excel in college, never make it to the pros. Some guys do pretty good in college, make it to the pros and excel. It's different how our brain processes when that pressure comes to be, and how you somewhat develop your routines and your defense mechanisms for how you handle that.
Yeah, that was Tate Sandell of Oklahoma. I guess he missed two kicks kind of in the clutch time frame there. I do remember that. I had to pull up the game. I couldn't think of it off the top of my head either, but I remember watching that game. That was one of the games that made me think of that. I think it was, I can't, it might have been the Miami kicker. He missed a few in the first round, I think.
Ohio State's guy missed.
Yeah.
He missed one big in the year, and then I think he missed one in the game when I was watching last night, or whatever night I was watching.
Yeah, he did have a big miss there. Yeah, last night. So yeah, I mean, and it's like you said, it's very tough. Well, one of the things in there that that was interesting because you are a guru. Sometimes that comes with a negative connotation, but if I say it, it doesn't have a negative connotation. If you say it about yourself, then I think it has a more negative connotation, kind of like, oh, you can trust me. If you say you can trust me, then that makes you kind of less trustworthy inherently to a degree. But with the kicking, I mean, you're one of the most knowledgeable people in modern day for the kicking game. You study it. It's clear on this show. It's clear when you talk about it. You have this school, but there are a lot of people in this space. I noticed this because I follow you on X. I follow this school and all of that. And I notice now that I'm getting other suggestions where it's like, oh, here's another kicker that does a similar thing to Shayne, but I didn't know how prominent this was. So it sounds like there are a decent amount of people in that space if they're trying to kind of attach themselves almost like an agent. It sounds like
to a degree, yeah. There are some very reputable names that have been doing this for a long time. Some around my age that did not make it to the NFL, but I know there's one guy that his father had started something and he kind of took it over, and he's kind of the prominent name in the industry nationwide, has huge camps, does like showcases and rankings and all that kind of stuff. Not really a model that I believe in, but I guess there's, double-edged sword need for it, I guess. But there's a lot of guys out there that are good coaches, but it's a business, and they're trying to get their clients. And when they have prominent clients, the other younger guys see that and think, ooh, well, if he could do that for him, he can do it for me. So that garners more business. It's not really a model I go for. I try to keep, a lot of my clientele. I go after new clients, obviously, but I don't want to take the credit for any of that. Like I want the player. I don't want to get the good player. I want to get the player and make them good, if that makes sense.
Oh, of course.
So there's a lot of that, but that's everywhere. I mean, you've got quarterback gurus, former quarterbacks that now do this, and it's a thing. You need people to help you specialize a skill. So there is a definite need and demand for it. But I tend to put a lot of my effort into the mental space because I know that that's where most of the downfall comes from, is from the mental side of any performance. So I take a lot of pride in that. But, it's just like any young golfer. You look at someone's golf swing at this stage of their career. When they start getting older, it changes. They learn. They start to do things differently. They start to handle the psychology of their performance under duress a little different. The more mature they get, I think that happens with a lot of these high school up to college, and then even into the early NFL and prolonged NFL careers that some guys have.
That's an interesting approach. The mental piece, especially for a kicker, is so big. We've seen that with a lot of kickers over the years, where one year they're one of the top kickers in the league, and then maybe even just a year or two after that, they still have the same ability. They still have the same strength and flexibility and all of that. It's not that they've aged out of it. It's that they've got I don't know if you want to call it the yips, but they've got a mental breakdown there, and it's hard to overcome that once you get it, I'm sure. So yeah, being mentally strong and being able to overcome it, being able to say, hey, I missed that last kick. I'm not going to worry about it this time. I'm not going to have it make me miss any other kicks here in the next few kicks. Like that's got to be an important piece of it. The coaching part that you're talking about with these gurus is interesting to me, because you see this concept a lot in sports where some of the people that are ultra elite at their sport, like the Tom Brady's, the Michael Jordan's, the top greatest of all time at their sports. Sometimes you see you would say, okay, well, yeah, I want to learn from that guy. He became the greatest of all time at a sport, or one of the top guys at his position. But sometimes those aren't always the guys to learn from, because they had maybe some innate ability, or they can't really relate to where you're starting. So somebody that was able to build themselves up and experience a lot of things like yourself, where you built up to one of the top kickers in the league. You were a Pro Bowler, all of that stuff, but you had to build up to that, as everybody does. But some people, it's like, yeah, they kind of start with an athletic profile. It's like Victor Wembanyama is probably not teaching a lot of people. It'd be tough to learn from him. It's like, well, I'm not 7'4" and have like an 8-foot wingspan. He probably wouldn't be able to teach me a whole lot about the game of basketball, being a 5'10", a guy that can barely jump over a piece of paper. But there is something to be said for somebody that did master the mental part and master the things along the way, where then, hey, I can take all of this 15 years of experience and now download that into you and have you start ahead of where I started.
And I think a lot of it too, for not just myself, but people that have kind of been in the fire, is myself. I've made a lot of mistakes along the way and learned those lessons. So just maybe I can help you avoid some of those mistakes. Or if you do find yourself in that position, here's how I handled it. I could have handled it better. Luckily, I learned through this situation that if I had done this, it would have worked out better. So, trying to help a little bit with, how you deal with things, as well as avoiding certain things if you can. But, it's human nature. We're going to make mistakes, and we don't always have control of everything around us either, but you have to learn how to adjust to things as they happen. Exactly.
Yeah, it's the concept of being able to learn from somebody else's mistake rather than repeating the mistake yourself. So that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, that's interesting stuff. I'm excited to get more into that here as we go with the show. But we're gonna switch our attention here to, we're gonna talk some college football with Robert Bondy of Spartans Wire here. He hasn't been on this version of the show yet, but he'll update us on what's going on with the Spartans, and we'll probably talk some college football playoffs with him. So stick with us. You're listening to Shayne Graham's Extra Points on Jethro FM. Happy to bring on this next guest. He's been on Sports Intel many a time. He'll be on Sports Intel actually this coming Monday here to talk some basketball, but we're going to talk football with him today here because we haven't talked to him since the coaching change, and I figure he's probably been following the college football playoffs, so we might be able to engage him on that. I am not going to start in the place that you think I'm going to start, Robert. I'm not going to mention the game that just finished. We're going to talk about your team first because this interview is about you and your knowledge. So I'm curious what you think about the Spartans and, any other team you want to mention too.
Yeah, no, definitely. Glad to be back on the show, Ryan and Shane. And I'm pretty excited about what Michigan State's done in the last, month, maybe month and a half now. I mean, it's kind of time flies, but I know last time I was on the show, we kind of were talking about what the future may hold for Jonathan Smith and the Michigan State football program, and not really having any true intel of which way they were going to go, and making the move to move on from Jonathan Smith seemed kind of like the only really possible way to do it for the program to get back on track. And I've been excited about a lot of the things that they've done since. The hiring of Pat Fitzgerald seems to be promising. There's obviously some who have some question marks around how things ended at Northwestern, not necessarily the off-the-field things, but, the last few seasons outside the COVID year. So there's some skeptical, fans out there still, but I personally think it's been it's a good hire. It's a safe hire. It's a stabilizing hire for Michigan State. And then some of the moves he's made with his own staff since then, too, is got me personally excited and, giving me some confidence that maybe we can get this thing back on track at Michigan State.
That's been interesting to me. You mentioned, we haven't really talked about this with any of the other state folks, the Fitzgerald's history, because although we don't like to go in kind of the salacious, gossipy stuff,
right,
unless it's more kind of news-driven discussion on it, but I've seen it come up because obviously the juxtaposition of the timing of it, they hired Fitzgerald, and then shortly after we had the whole thing with Sharon Moore. Then there was a lot of throwing back and forth among the Michigan and Michigan State camps of, well, your guy this and, well, your guy that, which I never like those arguments because both things can be true. Neither can be true. It's not, one doesn't impact the other. But it's interesting to me that there wasn't really any discussion, and there's been a lot of vetting of that situation, and then there was a settlement, and obviously State did their own vetting on it. We've talked about on the show, especially with the history history, you want to kind of make sure that this is somebody coming in with very few problems. So they had to be confident that there wasn't going to be anything going forward, because although Smith did kind of provide that, they had some folks in the history, you know, Tucker and other parts of the program, other sports and things at state that you don't necessarily want to get back into the scandal territory no matter what school you're going to. But if you already have a history of that, it makes it tougher. But clearly they think this is, you know, that's in the past, and they're ready to move forward here.
Yeah, I mean, that's what it certainly seems like. I mean, I know he, you know, won his lawsuit against Northwestern, and it seemed like he was essentially fired without true cause, right? And that whole, you know, hazing thing that went on, and, you know, all the details that are out there and whatnot. And the thing, too, is obviously, you know, being proven in a court of law, you know, in a lawsuit where I'm sure he was paid out pretty handsomely by Northwestern is one thing, but also the fact that Michigan State moved so quickly after the season ended, they let Jonathan Smith go the next day, and then you're finding out that night that there's reports that Pat Fitzgerald's going to be the next coach. So it was clear that things were working in the background, and that, you know, Jay Batt had done his homework. It wasn't like a impromptu hiring. I think they vetted it out as much as they needed to internally, outside of what they already kind of knew from the legal part of it. And, you know, it happened so quickly that you have to have faith that they know what they're doing with this hire, right? So it's like any coaching search. You know, I listen to a podcast where they always say, love to hire, they have no idea if it'll work. And it's kind of one of those things, because I thought, you know, about 2 years ago now, that Jonathan Smith was a home run hire at the time. And I think a lot of people thought that way. And it obviously didn't work out. So outside of, you know, the hazing thing that went on, you know, Pat Fitzgerald had a lot of success there. Last few years at Northwestern did kind of, you know, go downhill for him, but it was also when college football started to change, right? You know, Northwestern has the academic piece to it. They don't, to my knowledge, have the same kind of booster and donor support and, you know, the transfer portal piece of it with, again, academics playing in there. So I don't know, you know, again, one of the things outside of the off-field issues, if you have some skeptical thoughts on Fitzgerald, it's going to be how those last few years went for him. But it was a changing sport. It's a different, you know, dynamics now at Michigan State compared to where he was at Northwestern. And, he's a Midwest guy. He's got Midwest ties, and I think that's going to go a long way, because, you know, that was something that Jonathan Smith didn't have, and certainly I think came to bite him in the butt towards the end there.
And like you said, he's making a lot of hires that make you think, okay, he's got some pull here. There's a lot of, I mean, it seems to be all across the board. Everybody is pretty hopeful. It went from when we were talking about Smith in the last interview, kind of a bit of a malaise with the program, to now they're hopeful on every side of things. They got a lot of boosters that are excited and getting involved. I've seen a lot of former Spartans get more in tune with the program here. Then the level of coaches that he was able to recruit, he's getting some Michigan State guys back in the program. I know there's a lot of news about the offensive coordinator, but I thought the way they handled the defensive coordinator situation was really a good sign, because they kind of got the best of both worlds there.
Yeah, no, they really did. I think keeping Joe Rossi was the right move. I mean, Rossi ultimately, I think, earned his job back and earned his, you know, reason to be brought back after the way they ended the season. I know maybe that last game here against Maryland, they gave up quite a bit of points, but otherwise, you know, they had a really strong finish. Even the Michigan game where, you know, Michigan ended up getting some points in the end, they kept them in the game. The defense was, you know, the bright spot, and, you know, Rossi's enthusiasm on the sidelines certainly won over the fan base, and you could tell there's a connection with the players. So I think, you know, there's been a lot of portal entries in the last few days, but some of the guys they were able to retain, like, you know, Jordan Hall, I think that happens because you brought back Joe Rossi. And then, as you said, you kind of best both worlds, because you bring in you have Joe Rossi come back, but you also then get to bring in a guy like Max Bulla, who is, you know, considered by many one of those rising coaches, one of those rising, you know, smart defensive minds. Obviously has, you know, the history of Michigan State, you know, a Spartan legend on the field. And it started to build his way up at Notre Dame, where as the linebackers coach really, again, seemed to be one of those promising young guys. And to get him to leave Notre Dame to come to Michigan State is a move. And obviously I'm sure there's some money behind it. I'm sure there's some heartstrings, you know, pulling there too. But that's a big addiction, you know, and it's going to hopefully, you know, pay dividends when you complement him with, you know, with the Joe Rossi, you know, as that veteran leadership.
Well, and a lot of the news when they were trying to figure out what to do with that defensive coordinator position, or both coordinators. But do they let Rossi go? Do they get somebody in? A lot of Spartans Wire and a lot of the other pundits were talking about, well, I don't know if Bull is quite ready to be a defensive coordinator, but he's also one of those guys that you can miss the boat on, because if he's at Notre Dame and ascending and then bouncing around, you might miss the boat, and he would be past coming back to Michigan State, because that's where you are kind of in the general rankings of college football. That can happen. Sure, you can still pull those heartstrings, but you never know. Is that Shayne? You were kind of nodding your head on Bull. Is that a family that you're kind of have some familiarity with there?
Well, when I was a coach on Michigan State staff, I think Chuck Bulla was a coach there, and Chuck played there. I know the whole Bulla family is kind of a dynasty there. I think I can't remember the youngest, but he was playing there at the time as well. So I think that family has just kind of been connected to the university in such a good way that it's a legacy.
Exactly. I mean, that's the type of guy that you want to get back in the program, especially with the hire like Fitzgerald, because he seems to align with Fitzgerald pretty well in how they look at things and background and all of that, Robert. So I feel like that was a home run hire, but I just didn't know if they'd be able to get him back in anything less than defensive coordinator, and then you were having to get rid of Rossi. But like I said, they kind of played both sides of that one.
Yeah, they did. They really did. I think, they did it perfectly. And, I think he did get also labeled the co-DC. And my understanding is that Rossi is going to be probably, that primary defensive coordinator. But, Max gets to learn under him. And obviously under Fitzgerald, who was a star linebacker back in his day, and obviously the defensive-minded head coach. So I think it's a perfect situation for Michigan State. I think it's a pretty darn good situation for, for Max Bulla, too, and coming back to Michigan State and this opportunity. I'm sure it was tough to leave Notre Dame with what they have running there. And, obviously, what they have built up at with the Fighting Irish right now. But I think there's an opportunity too for Max Bulla to probably work his way up to maybe the full-time DC if Joe Rossi looks for other opportunities as a head coach eventually if things work out. And it was like you said, Ryan, is that I don't know if he was ready to come and be that full-time DC. At this point in his career, he's still a younger coach, and that's a lot of responsibility, and especially for where Michigan State's at, kind of in a fragile spot if they can't really screw this one up. They've kind of screwed up the last two in a lot of ways, so they can't screw up what's going on now. And being able to get Max back to bring back some of that juice, some of that Spartan pride, but also not have to give him all the wheel is probably a perfect. Playing both sides of the coin, as you said.
Yeah, you've got a good succession plan in place if you get those two guys there. But you mentioned a name that I think is one of the more important ones in this process as far as the player side of things. I mean, I don't know, your rankings would be much more important than mine on this, but as far as impact on the team, I don't think you could take a lot of players ahead of Jordan Hall for the team last year. And so getting him back, I think, is going to be important. I'm curious what you've been following all the portal movement. So what else sticks out to you other than retaining him as far as, because that's the part that with hiring Fitzgerald that my mind immediately went to. I understand the hire. I understand his background and his success and the Midwest ties and all of those things. The timing made it very tough on him as far as when he was coming in to play. It seems like he's done well with that, but it is late in the game to establish relationships with some of these existing guys, try to get people over in the portal. He doesn't have, it's not a similar situation to say like a Kyle Whittingham who comes into Michigan and he comes from a previous team that he probably can pull some guys from Utah. There's probably some guys that will follow him. Fitzgerald hasn't been coaching in the last few years, so he doesn't, although I'm sure he has contacts, he doesn't have the same immediate contact with players like some of these other coaches that are actively coaching.
Yeah, no, and that's definitely a good point. With Jonathan Smith, even when he came back a couple of years ago, the big draw was bringing in A.H. Childs, right, as his quarterback from Oregon State. So you don't get that with Pat Fitzgerald and not coming from a spot where he can bring some of his guys with him. But I think the way the portal, and it seems like every year it changes, it fluxes and whatnot. But I think it's alarming when you see, I think it's 30-plus names for Michigan State enter the portal on top of, what you're going to lose from the senior class. But the things I think you have to keep in mind is that anytime someone enters the portal, it's not necessarily because maybe they wanted to leave, maybe it's not because Michigan State wanted them to leave, but there's that NIL piece of it where maybe they don't think what that particular player was being paid from the previous coaching staff is what they deserve to be paid on the new staff. So there's a budget factor in there, and I think that's what we saw with a couple of the guys yesterday when there was a flurry entering the portal that I'm sure Michigan State would have loved to have them back, but they're not going to probably pay them what the old staff paid them. And it's a piece of college sports now that wasn't there, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, et cetera, but it's a big piece of it. So when you talk about the guys that are leaving, I think there are a few that you would love to have back. I mean, obviously, Nick Marsh is the first one that everyone will point to, but, that's a lot of money to keep him. And I always would consider a receiver of his nature kind of a luxury piece in the sense that, if you're a team that's contending to make the playoff or contending to win 9-10 games, you want that guy on your team. If you're a team like Michigan State who's just trying to get back things on track and trying to make a bowl game, you don't necessarily, you could spend his $1 million, let's say, towards, 5 players that can make up that gap. So, it's alarming when you see the amount of players entering the portal, but I think it was ultimately expected, and I think it's nothing to be too alarmed about or too worried about as a Michigan State fan. You are keeping some key guys like Jordan Hall. I'm glad that they got Alessio it sounds like he's locked in and coming back again as your probably returning starter unless they do look elsewhere in the portal. So you got some key pieces on both offense and defensive side of the ball. They just right before we got on the call, I saw Connor Moore, one of their key offensive linemen, announced he's coming back for next year. That was another guy that potentially can make more money on the portal market. So, I think the guys you do see come back are the guys that this coaching staff really liked. They really found a way to make sure they got the money they deserve and made sure they came back. I don't think you see anyone on that list of, outgoing that they really, feel heartbroken that they're losing. Again, I'm not going to say, I wouldn't want Nick Marsh or I wouldn't want, Mekhi Frazier back, but I also don't think, the staff's willing to pay what they deserve to be paid on the market, where Michigan State's at right now.
Yeah, that's the big thing with Marsh, especially because we talked to Chris Solari a couple weeks ago, and he was talking about how he still has some hope that they could be in the mix for Marsh, but it just seems like it'd be too far of a bridge on that price tag.
Yeah, that's my understanding too. Again, just from reading the tea leaves, hearing what other people say about it, and you look at there was a report just I think yesterday, maybe the day before that LSU and Notre Dame have emerged, and it's kind of the two teams to watch for Nick Marsh. And it's like if you're Nick Marsh, who probably has one more year before he's probably trying to go pro, does it make sense to come back to Michigan State, who's rebuilding, or do you do a kind of it's off another Michigan State receiver, Keon Coleman, a few years ago, go to a contender for something bigger, have a big season, then go pro? Again, I'd love to have Nick Marsh back. He's the type of guy that can win you a game, he can make some plays, and would be their best offensive player. And you hate seeing at Michigan State 3 of the last 4 years your top NFL prospect leaving through the portal and going to a contender. But with where Michigan State's at, I agree. I think the bridge is going to be probably too much, and I wouldn't blame him. As long as he's not going down the street to Michigan. I know there was some who thought that might happen, but I'm just glad if he's not in the Amazing Blue, I won't hold anything against him.
That would be a tough one to transfer.
Yeah.
That it's happened, it will happen, but not necessarily with a player that big. But yeah, interesting stuff. They've got a lot of good movement and momentum on the team. But want to come back and talk some college football as a whole and continue talking Michigan State. We'll come back here with Robert Bondy of Spartans Wire after the break. Stick with us. You're listening to Shayne Graham's Extra Points on Jethro FM. Coming back here with Robert Bondy, one of our favorites to cover the Spartans and really sports as a whole. He keeps his finger on the pulse here, and I'm curious what you've thought about the college football playoff so far here. It's been an interesting set of matchups. One of the conversations I wanted to have with Shayne at some point, we didn't have it in the first 2 open segments, but it's been a big discussion about the whole concept of, do you put truly the 12 best teams in, or do you make some room for the underdogs so you can have a little bit more of a Cinderella format? But then ultimately a team that was highly questioned, we talked about this last year, Indiana was highly questioned for being admitted into the college football playoff. I think you and I both thought they were legitimate, but there were schedule strength questions, and now they're all the way up to number one, and now nobody's really saying that, but there's always going to be questions. It was Notre Dame this year, it was Alabama, who maybe that might come out again, but they did win their first round game. It's always tough to get that exactly right, but college football as a whole is just so unregulated. So I feel like that's the main thing that needs to be is like the whole thing needs to be reined in. NIL, transfer portal, college football playoff. There's just not a lot of direction of where to go, so it's kind of hard because it's like, yeah, people are going to work the advantages of the system if you do have some advantages to be worked.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's been fun to watch, and I should probably start off by saying congrats to your Hoosiers. That was pure domination what they did to Alabama. I was watching the game before coming on, and when we were talking about what time I'd be coming out, I was wondering if we'd be watching a nail biter at the end of it when this segment started, or if it would be a blowout. It was really a blowout. But to your point, it's tough because I personally like that they include the 5 conference champions, which this year happened to be 2 from that group of 5 stage with James Madison and Tulane. But I like that they give them a chance. I think when we see this thing expand in a few years, I would hope they continue to do that. But they also will include more of those blue bloods. Because, again, I mean, this year was a tough year, especially because you have a team like Notre Dame, who was probably the first team left out, where they took Miami and Alabama over. And we're splitting hairs, I think, because, Miami obviously has proven what we saw last night, what they did against Ohio State, and then also winning on the road at A&M the week before. They obviously deserve to be in over Notre Dame. They beat Notre Dame head-to-head, and they've proven on the field since then, too. And, Alabama also went on the road and won a game. But the field really does, we deserve to have a team like Notre Dame in there because they ultimately did everything right even after, that tough start. So it's been fun. It's been competitive. There's been some blowouts. So there's blowouts every year, and I think people always say, well, why are there so many blowouts? It's just simply the nature of it, right? Even when it was a 14 playoff, there was always at least 1, if not 2 blowouts in that format, too. So there always will be, I think if they do expand it to, 16 or, I think 4 teams in play as well. I've even heard models of 24 teams, right? So, they could expand all the way to what they would do with the FCS, Division 2, 3 levels as well. I wouldn't hate it because I think the more the merrier. I've always kind of felt that way when it comes to the playoff. But I also do, understand those who feel that, the regular season should be more sacred and you should have to earn your way in. So, the last few years, you have, probably seen a team like, last year especially, Ohio State wouldn't have been in the field if you, didn't have the expanded playoff after they lost to Michigan and didn't win the Big Ten. They went on to win the title and were clearly the best team in the country last year. We're looking at now where that could be Miami. Miami probably wouldn't be in if we were at an 18 model or a 14 model, and they've proven in the first 2 rounds they could go on and win the whole thing. So it's been fun. It's been exciting. And the nice thing, too, is there's a little bit of new blood this year. Obviously we still have Georgia left. But other than that, Oregon, Indiana, Miami, those are teams that sure have, some of that prestige and brand to them. But those are also teams that I don't think have won a title either ever or at least in a long time for Miami. So it's been fun. It's, I'm excited to watch this next game here with Ole Miss and Georgia kicking off, I think at the top of the hour. And that'll be a game, too, hopefully.
That's one of the games I was thinking of because you talk about kind of the fact that you like the inclusion of the more, Cinderella teams, the teams that maybe play in smaller divisions, not as highly rated divisions. Look at who's playing quarterback for Ole Miss here in this game. Yep. He came from Ferris State. We're familiar with him in this area, Trinidad Chambliss. He came, that team still maintained a lot of talent. We just talked to somebody on our other show there. We talked to the associate athletic director of Ferris about the talent that they were able to maintain, but they lost, I think, 8 guys to major college programs, lost a lot of talent, but that was clearly big-time talent. Chambliss, if he had played all year, I maintain he probably should have been in the Heisman. I know he was in the Heisman conversation, but he probably would have been invited to New York had he played all 12 games and started in all 12 games. So, and he was not languishing, but he was over here at Ferris State hiding from everybody else. And then Lane Kiffin gets him as his backup quarterback. And lo and behold, he's top 8 in the Heisman award this year. And now he's getting ready for a big time rematch with Georgia. So yeah, there's talent talent to be had. Signetti did the same thing. He took a bunch of talent from James Madison, and that's what fueled the school last year. And a lot of the transfers that he's getting aren't necessarily top of the market transfers. He's taking the talent that is right for the team and elevating them. Something that probably somebody like Fitzgerald is trying to do at Michigan State, because that's been their valley with guys like Mark D'Antonio and others in the past.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think that's kind of the mold of how you have to do it, right? You have your guys on roster that you brought in through the recruiting, because it is always so. I think, in my opinion, to be you build your teams through recruiting, and you can supplement through the transfer portal is probably the perfect way to do it. And I think even with Signetti, he's kind of the unicorn in all this, right? Because I know it's been a lot of transfers that have came in and then hit the ground running and made it work. But you do look typically at those teams that are at the top of it. It's because they recruit really well, and then they find these guys who come in and make a difference in the portal. And obviously Chambliss is a perfect example of that at Ole Miss. He was supposed to be their backup this year, and injuries led to one thing, and he got his chance. And not only did he get his chance, he's running with it. And it's a fun local story. It's fun for Ole Miss too. Obviously, he went through the whole Wayne Kiffin debacle and how he kind of played them and led them on for so long. So I'm excited to watch that one. I'm excited to see how he does tonight, and rooting for the local kid. And again, it'd be nice to even if they beat Georgia, then we are really looking at a kind of I hate to call it Cinderella story, because these are all really good teams and they're all really good programs. I mean, even Indiana, who I think would be considered the quote Cinderella. I mean, there's no Cinderella about them this year. They're the number one team in the country for a reason. They deserve it. So it'll be fun though. That's not just Ohio State, Georgia, or it's not just Ohio State, Alabama, et cetera. Right? Again, we're going to see some new matchups, some new blood, and that's the parity in college football right now. It's kind of crazy how different it can happen, how quickly it can change in just a short amount of time.
Especially with what we're talking about with the transfer portal and NIL, you would think that would maybe concentrate some of the talent and the winning, but it's led to more parity. Shayne, I'm curious where you lie on this. We're discussing with Robert about kind of the idea of right now it's a 12-team college football playoff, but the idea of, do we try to put the 12 best teams in there, or do we try to leave room for the James Madisons and Tulanes of the world, or do we expand it so that we can involve a little bit more? But then, of course, whenever you expand it, then you're still leaving. It doesn't matter if you go to 16 or 24 or 152, you're still going to be leaving the 153rd out of there.
I mean, you see it every year with March Madness, so it's always something that kind of makes you it's always something that kind of makes you feel like the March Madness pool. Everyone gets that, fills it out. There's always some team complaining that they didn't get in that should have got in. And how many start in that one? I mean,
64. 64. Now it's 68 with the play-in. Yeah.
Well, and maybe that's the answer is a play-in, right? Like you come up with some sort of system where some of the group schools kind of get their chance. I don't know how you do that. That's above my pay grade. We thought 4 was going to be better than just the 2 top teams. And then we complained about the 4. And now we've got 12. And now we're complaining about the 12. So it does become very cyclical, and it's something that I think will never have a perfect model. But, I mean, I think this year you hate to throw shade at anyone that feels like they deserve it, but I felt like there were teams that should have been there. I think most people would agree. Is it purely on ranking? I mean, I honestly hate the ranking system, because I don't like it when certain teams get ranked in the top 5 without playing a single game, and then they lose early, and then they get to be rewarded for that high ranking later in the season because they never dropped that far. But then you have other teams that go all year, struggle to climb the rankings, and don't quite get up high enough, and then they lose one game and it kills them. And I'm not a fan. I think they shouldn't start the rankings until like week 5 or 6 or something. And then, if they had a way to maybe do some sort of a play-in, I think you try to do that, but who knows what the best model's going to be.
That's a great point, though, about the rankings, because it's something that's kind of always gotten under my skin a little bit too. And you are basically giving teams an advantage based on kind of historical data, because you're going to rank the teams with a better reputation, a better history, inherently a little bit better. Indiana had to earn their way up. I saw that. That's completely legitimate. They hadn't been good, so they had to play their way into that. And then maybe some of the other teams in even the Big Ten, a Michigan or an Ohio State, they're going to be more prominent and ranked higher. So yeah, it's not as uniform as it needs to be. We talked about that a little earlier in the segment, how there's just not, it doesn't feel like you say it's above your pay grade. If it's above your pay grade, it's definitely above my pay grade. But the problem is we don't know whose pay grade it is, because we don't really have a lot of people actually kind of truly in charge of the process, and it feels like that are the visionaries and actually have the authority to kind of manage all of this.
Well, and I think even when there's always some genius concept, let's form a committee. And this committee is comprised of experts on football, right?
Right.
Or it's supposed to be.
Right.
And sometimes you see people and you're like, what are they doing on that? But you know what? There's another type of leadership cycle that I think we see every day in the news, in politics, that committees and bureaucracy and all of that literally do nothing but slow things down and make things harder. And who knows what, do you make it an association of active coaches, or do you make it, they have to be all retired coaches? But do you have people on there that really just have no background in anything, or have never really proven themselves at a really high level to kind of be in a consideration spot where their opinion matters?
It's a great point. And I mean, that's one of the groups that is trying to have some oversight in some of the things in college football. There's some Congress involvement in some of the subject matters too. And then that's even further distance from things. So it's an interesting discussion. But Robert, we appreciate you joining the show. We appreciate the discussion. We appreciate all the information about the Spartans and otherwise here. We'll look forward to having you back on this show. For people that want more of Robert, he'll be on Sports Intel on Monday. We'll be talking some Spartans basketball with him. We knew we had enough information to kind of separate and talk some basketball with him on that show. But tell the people where they can follow you here in the meantime.
Yeah, no, definitely. I'm always writing for Spartans Wire. It's spartanswire.usatoday.com. And just check us out. It's going to be crazy starting tomorrow. The portal opens, so there'll be a lot of action for Michigan State especially. So follow me there. We'll have you cover anything Michigan State football, basketball, hockey, and the rest.
Be sure to follow them. Be sure to get your updates there, and we'll probably get some updates from on Sports Intel on the portal side as well. But we appreciate you coming on, and I'll look forward to talking to you here next week.
All right, sounds great. Thanks for having me on, guys.
Thanks, Robert. Thanks to Robert Bondy. Appreciate him coming on. Always good stuff about the Spartans here. We're going to turn our attention to Josh Helmer. He's the new one at the helm. I didn't really realize that pun was available, Shane. Josh Helmer at the helm of Lions Wire, but he's taken over here, it looks like, for Jeff Risdon. He's also of the Hawkeyes Wire, so maybe we'll talk some college football with him. But we'll introduce him to the Lions universe here and get his opinions on the upcoming week and the interesting offseason that they're heading into here. So stick with us. You're listening to Shayne Graham's Extra Points on Jethro FM.
From the Scully Statewide Moving Studios in Granville.
Country with a twist. Jethro FM. 1530 AM. WYGR Wyoming Grand Rapids. 94.9 FM Grand Rapids. 99.5 FM Lowell. And Jethro South. 980 AM WAKV Otsego Plainwell. 98.9 FM Otsego. And 105.1 FM Kalamazoo. Available worldwide at jethro.fm.
Happy to bring on this next guy. We're going next man up here, Shane, because you're used to doing that in the NFL for 15 years. The Lions do a good job of that. We were supposed to have Billy Reset on of Lions Wire, but we have the new guy at the helm of the Lions Wire. Sorry for the pun, but I just discovered it in the right before the break, Josh. So this is Josh Helmer of the Lions Wire. He's coming over from Hawkeyes Wire. I think he's still working for the Hawkeyes, so maybe we'll even talk some Hawkeyes, but appreciate you joining the show with us here.
Ryan, Shane, first off, Happy New Year to you both. And, still doing the Iowa gig too, so double dipping Iowa and Detroit. And so, obviously, very familiar with Sam Laporta coming in. I thought that was a great draft pick when it happened, and it certainly has played out that way. Gentlemen, Happy New Year. Great to meet both of you guys, and thanks for the invite.
Definitely. Yeah. I was just going to make the joke. Oh, okay. You just want to talk about Sam Laporta the whole time. Obviously, we got Campbell in the mix as well. Both very good draft picks for the Lions. I mean, Iowa puts out a lot of talent. I think it's kind of underrated how much of a feeder they are to the NFL in general. But yeah, I'm curious to get your takes. We were talking about this a little bit as we were planning the interview, but there's the idea that there's a lot of people that cover the Lions, and there's a lot of talk in the market, but I think a lot of it can get subjective. Even from some of the pundits, it can get subjective because they're ultimately Lions fans or started as Lions fans, especially on the radio side, because you don't really need a journalism background to be on the radio side. I'm an example of that. I've technically written a book, but I didn't start as a beat writer or anything like that, but I try to be objective about the subject matter as much as I can. And it's got to be an interesting time to come into this, Josh, because you're coming in from elsewhere in the wire universe here, and you're coming into a Lions team that a lot of people are down on, but you wrote a good article talking about, hey, okay, yeah, they're 8-8, they're not quite where you wanted them to be, but there's some statistics and some things. Well, I guess that's now, Shayne. I don't know if we've ever gotten that. That was a dial tone. When's the last time you've heard a dial tone?
I honestly can't tell you the last time I heard that. It might have been on a TV show portraying the 80s. I'm not sure.
Yeah, well, I think the Stranger Things finale is going on right now I think that's set in like the 80s or 90s. So apparently I couldn't believe hearing that, because this has happened before where we've dropped a call for various reasons, connection issues on our side or their side or what have you, but I almost never know that the call's been dropped, because unless I hear that subtle click, I usually can't hear it. It's just I go into my question and then they just don't answer, and I figure they didn't like my question or they didn't know. But yeah, a dial tone. That's amazing here. I would prefer that, actually, if everybody had a dial tone. So I'm curious, Josh, if you're back and maybe you didn't like my question. So I'm sorry if my question offended you.
I apologize. I just got disconnected from you. Your question one more time.
Oh yeah, no problem. So I was just talking about coming into this market and how you're kind of coming in fresh here. You're coming in from Hawkeye's Wire, as we mentioned, and how it's kind of, for a lot of the people that are here in the market, fans, people covering the team, it's a down year, quote unquote, compared to the last couple years. Now, historically, it's not really a down year for the Lions. You know, how soon we forget some of the history there. But 8-8 is down from what they initially expected. There's been some injuries; those have been chronicled. But you had a good article about some things with DVOA, and there's been a lot written about the kind of wins below and above expectation. There's some reasons to be hopeful about this team, but I'm just curious kind of what your thoughts are now coming into this market and seeing it kind of with fresh eyes.
Well, first off, I think it's a ton of fun to get to jump into this thing and cover the Lions, so I'm excited about that. It's obviously, I understand with the fan base is that here, if you go into Soldier Field, if you beat the Chicago Bears, it's a fourth straight winning season, but you're not going to the postseason. And the expectations to start this year, because of what Detroit and Dan Campbell and Jared Goff and this collection of talents of pass catchers and Gibbs and Montgomery, because of what they've done over the last couple of seasons, okay, well, Detroit was the number one seed for the first time in the NFC a season ago. And they disappointed in the playoffs. Got beat out of the divisional round. Didn't get back to the NFC Championship game. You enter this season as one of the Super Bowl favorites at any odds-making book, and you're not going to the postseason. So naturally, I would never hop on air and tell Lions fans that they have no reason to be upset. They absolutely have reasons to be disappointed and upset with where this season has gone. But I don't think they're as far removed from getting back to that point to where you're talking about winning the NFC North or getting a wild card berth and trying to get back into position to play for another NFC championship game and to get to that elusive first Super Bowl. The injuries are a real thing. I know that probably, guys, you've had this discussion, and others in this market have probably had the discussion. The day-to-day approach is there's something to that's part of why the injuries have piled up the last couple of years. Well, that's a question that the organization will have to probably look at themselves over the course of this offseason and think seriously about. But I just can't ignore the injuries. It is what it is. It's disappointing for Detroit, but the reality is they have been one of the franchises that lost the most games the last 2 years, and that's a real thing for Detroit. You get those guys healthy, we can talk about maybe what the schedule lines up like next season, depending upon what happens in Chicago, and that can be a helper. I do think there's a difference, third-place schedule versus fourth-place schedule, but don't count me in the camp that the Lions are just miles away from making a serious run back toward perhaps their first Super Bowl appearance.
We're still kind of in a deep dive about the injury side of things. Shayne and I have had conversations about it. We've brought on experts about it because obviously Shayne did a very good job of staying healthy and saw the internal the internal makings of the team and how that all goes. But it's still, even for and we were just talking about the mental side of the game and how he coaches young men with that, but it's still very hard to kind of, there's so many different issues, Shayne, that can be involved in the injury side of things that it's hard to kind of delineate, well, okay, so the NFL as a whole is experiencing this, but then some teams experience it more than others, and that kind of goes in waves. Like the Ravens were a team that were very heavily injured the last few years, and then now it seems to be the Lions. I don't think that's our market talking. I think in general they are one, over the last couple years, they are one of the heaviest injured teams in the NFL, along with actually the Ravens and some other ones. So, you go to, is that how they practice? Is that, we've talked about some of the rule changes. We've talked about different things, but it's a hard thing to put your finger on because there's about 10 factors that participate in it too.
And you have people that sit in offices also trying to figure those things out, that are making decisions. And what happens is there's always a scapegoat. I think a lot of times, the obvious answer is what's going on in the training room. Is there something in the training room that's not right? I don't think that's necessarily always the case, because sometimes these are acute injuries that happen because of some, awkward landing or contact or something like that. Sometimes when you have the non-contact kind of soft tissue injuries, the next person on the chopping block is usually the strength coach. Are they being prepared? Are they being strengthened? Or all of these things. And usually when you look in the weight room of every NFL team, those workouts are designed to almost really maintain more so than build and develop like they do in college. It's a completely different type of workout style, because they figure these guys are professionals. Most of them are going to do a lot on their own, but they do have team activity and team protocol for things. But almost every team's off season, from the time the season ends to the time they start back up, when the team reports in, say, April for team workouts, is that strength staff has done all this research on all the injuries they went through that year. And they try to come up with some sort of routine protocol that addresses those injuries. I remember the one that sticks out the most for me was Carson Palmer blew his ACL, MCL, every L in his knee. And everything that we did to start our workouts were these little movement and resistance and deceleration, trying to strengthen our knees, because that was the big thing that year for us. And every team's going to kind of go through that, but then you're always going to have the coaches that are always going to try to work on what's going to help make guys faster, what's going to make guys more explosive. All of these things, there's always some sort of new trend, new type of workout. When the I can't remember the name of it. What's the one where everybody gets in the gym? They call it a box, and you do like these really long, hard workouts. And I'm
gapping on it. I'm not sure.
Reebok was a big sponsor for it. They have them on TV. I can't think of the name of it off the top of my head. I am absolutely blanking. But it's instead of a lot of heavy weightlifting, it's a lot of repetitive movement with lighter weight. A lot of pull-ups, a lot of push-ups.
Like CrossFit? Are you talking about CrossFit? Okay,
CrossFit.
There we go. We got it. We got it.
Okay. So a lot of teams tried to implement CrossFit. They found out very quickly that does not work for football. That does not build strength or any injury prevention. It actually almost creates more degenerative issues than you're actually going to build. It might put you in really good shape, but what football player isn't in really good shape? So there's all these trends that happen, and then there's technology, and then there's new equipment in the weight room that gets invented, all that kind of stuff. It's hard to say that that's really ever truly the reason, because sometimes the ball just doesn't bounce your way. I mean, we're talking about hypothetical, figurative, all of that kind of stuff. Figurative, literal. The football is made with 2 points. And when it lands, when you drop it, it sometimes bounces right, it sometimes bounces left, it sometimes bounces straight up. You never know. So sometimes teams just have bad luck. And I think, unfortunately, we've seen a lot of that here in this state. But, whether it be with random calls that turn into some new rule change the next year because it was a crazy call, or injuries that happen and you lose half of your defense for the whole year. Sometimes the ball just doesn't bounce your way, and some teams get the lucky bounces. And I mean, you look at so many interceptions where quarterbacks, they're like, oh, he had 10 interceptions, or he had this many interceptions by this time of the year. Well, how many of those were tipped up in the air? How many of those were drop balls? How many were actually thrown to the wrong person, or a bad pass, versus a lack of execution across the board? So everything isn't always what it seems, but sometimes you have to kind of let luck and let fate work how it may.
That's one of the many factors that factor in. And like you said, it all counts the same if you threw the ball off your back foot as a quarterback and threw it directly to a safety, or you hit your receiver right in the hands, but it pops up off the hands and it falls into the waiting hands of a cornerback. So, yeah, it's interesting stuff. We'll be talking more about injuries and different off-season preparation things here. We were talking about that a little bit in the break. But we want to get Josh back in the conversation. We're going to take a quick break, but we're going to talk to him about kind of what he sees as the strategy here going forward with the Lions for this week. He outlined some of the differences in winning and losing this game, and then kind of the shaping the team going forward here. So coming back here with Josh Helmer of the Lions Wire, the new man in charge of the Lions Wire here. We're excited to have him on the show and have him in the mix in the market here. But I'm curious, you were talking, Josh, about kind of the differences, because there's a lot of nuances to this last game. I know people aren't happy that they're not going into the playoffs, and that's, like you said, legitimate, but we have to move on. We have to play for the future here, and there is a lot of playing for the future that can be done in this final game of the season, because there's a big difference between that third strength of schedule in the division and the fourth strength of schedule. You obviously have a difference in the picks if you win it, but you're playing not only a division rival, but a division rival that took your offensive coordinator and now has taken off and won the division in a year that you were favored to win the division until the Parsons trade, I guess, but for the most part favored to win the division. So I'm curious kind of where you lie on that and how you see this game playing out, both from that that standpoint, and the other part of that is playing some young guys potentially too. Sit versus start, as far as, do you rest some of the veterans that don't necessarily need to play in favor of the young guys to see how they do in increased role?
I think this Week 18 game with no playoffs on the line, and honestly, plenty to be gained from losing it. Let's just, be honest about it. I know Dan Campbell and I imagine coaches, players, and I believe them when they get in front of the microphone and say it. They're not in the business of approaching any game and feeling like, let's actively go try to tank this game. For the most part, I believe that. And for Detroit, hey, you win this game, you beat Chicago again, long term, building into next season and beyond with Caleb Williams and Ben Johnson and what's going on in Chicago. They look like, hey, they're here to stay. So there's something to be said for building a little bit of dominance over Chicago, but there is something to be gained from not winning this game for Detroit. You've obviously got next year, you look at the schedule and you lose this game, and obviously you get the fourth place schedule going into the next year. Of course, if you and Minnesota both lose, then okay, obviously you get the fourth place schedule that way too. But if you just kind of don't win the game yourself, then you've got it. And I do think, guys, there's a substantial difference, third place versus fourth place schedule. Again, I think it's hard to tell fans to actively root against their team, so I wouldn't necessarily encourage Lions fans to do that, because that's a tough thing to do. But the NFC East, the NFC West, the AFC South, that's the opponents beyond what's built in. Of course, your 6 division games versus the NFC North. You'll play the entirety of the NFC South next season with, based on the way we're coming to Week 18 right now, it doesn't seem totally daunting, but tough to project. AFC East, that's probably more challenging than it's been in years past, with the Patriots rising up, and the Bills are the Bills, and we'll see about obviously the Dolphins and the Jets there. But the NFC East, the NFC West, and AFC South, those games where it's dependent upon how you finish in your division and how they finish in their division, I do think you'd much rather play the Giants than the Commanders next season. You look at the NFC West, and at least where we sit right now, guys, there's a gigantic gap between those top 3, Seattle, San Francisco, the Rams, and Arizona, the Cardinals in the cellar there, and the AFC South. That certainly looks more enticing to get the Tennessee Titans on the schedule than the Indianapolis Colts. So that's what's at stake. Obviously, the NFL draft positioning, too. You could go a lot of different directions based on what happens with you and what happens with everybody else in this final week of the NFL season. Miami winning last week kind of opened the door for you to get as high as 11, depending upon everything else that happens if Atlanta wins again. So it's just kind of crazy what's possible for Detroit from an NFL draft standpoint. So, again, it would be good for the Lions to not win this game versus Chicago, but I don't believe that's the approach that they're taking, guys. And I do think if you can play some young players and that kind of 2 birds with 1 stone for you, where you maybe wind up losing the game, but they get snapped, I think that's a good approach.
Exactly. You do have some players, because it seems like Campbell has kind of given himself a little bit of an out with this, because I mean, if anybody that's seen him and seen him coach, there's not any quit in this guy. He's not going to cede this game to the Bears, especially under the circumstances. I think he's going to try to win it. I think he's going to put the players out there to potentially win it. But he's also talked about a lot of these guys that are hurt, St. Brown and other guys that are fighting injuries. I think we could see them sitting and kind of, like you said, getting guys out there to slot, playing a full game, which he hasn't really done this year, getting a full game's worth of snaps. Offensive line, you've got to look at that. They just got rid of the center that they were kind of debuting, so that's not going to happen. But Frazier, some of those guys on the offensive line. So I think they probably will try to find a happy medium there. But like you said, Josh, I think they're going to try to win this game and be motivated by the fact that they're former offensive coordinator, and a lot of other staff members, Antoine Randall and JT Barrett, are over with the Bears, and some former players too. So it'll be go ahead, Josh.
And a winning season, right? I mean, look, I could sit here and paint a scenario that yes, it helps your NFL draft situation, and okay, the schedule would be easier, but there's something to be said for, hey, you're building a culture of winning in Detroit. So I don't mind that approach either. If they don't even really want to approach it to where, hey, we're going to get young players snaps because that's building for the future, if they want to approach it as, hey, we're trying to win football games, I totally get that too.
Exactly. There's really an argument for either side. That's why it was interesting to discuss here. But we'll be excited to watch the game. We'll have some coverage on the show next week, kind of summarizing it. We have a good lineup there. We have somebody covering the Bears side of things, somebody covering the Lions side of things, and then we have Eric Kramer, who played for both the Lions and the Bears. So that'll be fun to have him on. But Josh, we appreciate you coming on the show. We're glad you're in the market, and we'll be looking forward to following your coverage and also having you on the show in the future here to check in with you during the off season and as things progress over the course of the year here. But tell people where they can follow you here, especially being new to the market.
At the Lions Wire, so that's Twitter. It's X, formerly known as Twitter, and Facebook, same thing. You search Lions Wire, give the page a like. You can follow me. I'm at Josh on Rep on Twitter, so that's me. But really, if you just support the website, lionswire.usatoday.com. That's where you can find us. Ryan, Shayne, appreciate you guys, man. Hope you have a very happy New Year, and call me anytime, friends.
Appreciate it. Yeah, you too. Take care, and we'll definitely have you in the mix here soon. We appreciate you joining the show.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Josh. Appreciate it. We'll talk to you soon. Thanks to Josh Helmer. Appreciate him joining the show. It'll be interesting to follow his coverage here for the market. Another new guy in the Lions market here. We've had a lot of them on the show, so it's fun to have somebody else in the mix here. But I want to kind of continue with that discussion a little bit because I intentionally wanted to make sure that Josh got his opinions in there, but with the extra half hour that we've got here with Shayne, I'm curious where he lies in this discussion on kind of the motivations here for the 17th game of the season for the Lions. So we'll get that after the break. Stick with us. You're listening to Shayne Graham's Extra Points on Jethro FM. Coming back here in studio with Dan and Shayne, and I'm curious on your thoughts on this, Shayne, because we were talking with Josh about the idea. This is an interesting scenario. I know, like we said, I know people aren't happy that the Lions are not headed towards the playoffs, but that's done. The Band-Aid's ripped off. We got to move on from that particular subject. And so now there's a lot to be settled here, not only with what schedule they'll have next year, but what draft pick, whether they finish over 500 or under 500 in this next game, and it's all happening against a team that took their offensive coordinator and a lot of their staff and several of their players and are doing better, at least in this year. The advanced statistics are very close between Chicago and Detroit. We discussed that on Sports Intel with our Chicago expert, Rob Huff. But I'm curious where you lie as a former player, as somebody that's seen virtually every scenario. You were also coach. This is kind of a tough one. I can see an argument for either side, but your opinion is infinitely more valuable on kind of what direction you see this going and what direction you kind of would like to see it go.
Well, whenever I think about how the last game of a season is played, sometimes it's you're trying to get into playoffs. It's a desperation move. Sometimes it's you're already out, and you've already got guys. In the NFL, you got guys, if they know that they're not in the playoffs, they've already booked flights for vacations, and that is a thing. Certain players on the team, when they find out about that, get upset because they're saying, "Hey, you're distracted. You're not even thinking about playing. You're already in the Bahamas or whatever." What happens with that is it's your resume. I mean, that's that game goes on your resume. So I don't think that there's ever any player that would ever purposely tank for a better draft pick, because that draft pick might be replacing them. And when a team doesn't have the success that they wanted, there's usually a lot of searching for the scapegoat. And is it a salary cap issue? Is it a superstar that's getting paid a lot of money? Do we try to bring somebody else in younger? If you're a bubble guy that hasn't really proven yourself, do we try to get somebody that is proven? If you're a guy that, you've just started to come into a little bit of some success, are you used as a leverage for trading for the draft? Like, you don't know. So you have to keep your value and create your value with your play. So you've got to have pride and intrinsic motivation that you don't need people to push you along. You need to do it for yourself, because ultimately doing it for yourself is going to be doing it for the team as well. But I just think it needs to be something that you treat it like it's the biggest game of your life. And honestly, I always have this thing that I do with the guys that I train. If they haven't had me do this to them yet, it's always like a test that I do with them. No matter where they're standing on the field, I'll hand them a football and say, show me your best kick. And ultimately, 90% of them start walking back to 60 yards so they can show me a 60-yard field goal. And I'll give you one guess. If I let them kick it, what happens? They usually try to kick it as hard as they can, and the ball doesn't go anywhere near where they're wanting it to go. Ultimately, that's a test that says every time you perform, it is your best performance. It is. So when I give you a football and say, show me your best kick, you can literally set it down right where you're standing or move up close. It doesn't matter. That is going to be the best kick of your life, because it's the only kick you have right now. So when you have a chance to play as a professional football player and you realize how blessed and fortunate you are, that game has to be treated like it's the most important game you've played, because it's the one you're playing right now.
We have a lot of stories like this on the Lions, because I think back to last year where they were headed towards the playoffs, but in those last games did mean something. They were playing the Vikings basically for the division at the end of the season, but you had a guy like Christian Mahogany, who was a guard that played the last two games and then basically won a starting spot for this year based on those two games of last year. You got a young guy like Isaac Slaw, who gets drafted in the third round. He wasn't even invited to some of the main camps and showcases in college football, the Senior Bowl or anything like that. So he had to play his way in, and he had to have a very good performance in one of the lower ranked ones to earn his way up to even be seen by a lot of these teams. And then that one performance then probably raised his draft position by multiple rounds and ended up with uniting him with his childhood team, because he's here from Hudsonville. So there's a lot of examples. The best one probably for you, Shayne, on this team is a guy like Jake Bates. Him kicking balls in the UFL, but at the time the XFL, I believe he was on the XFL side, but the USFL, UFL, XFL world, he was kicking balls in Ford Field and getting a showcase there. And a lot of people would say, well, but you're in that league. Well, clearly Detroit was paying attention. He's in their state, he's in their arena, and then he becomes one of the best kickers in the league, especially last year. This year he still had a solid year because he treated those games. He took that ball like you do with your students there. He took that ball and he treated every ball that he kicked like the one that needed to get him to the NFL, and a couple of those 60-yarders did get him to the NFL.
Yeah. And it's like with anything that you put effort into, if you're not purely intentional and you don't give it your best effort, there's a phrase that I like to say, I never do anything halfway. We'll just say that. Sometimes that can be a good thing, because I put so much effort into the things that I really care about that I know that I don't leave anything on the table, and I don't give it a chance to have any regrets over how I handled something. Sometimes because I get a little gung ho, it probably gets me in trouble if I'm being honest. In smaller things in life, I guess. But whether it's a remedial task or you're playing a professional football game, if you don't treat it like it's the most important thing you're doing, then it's going to show up. Whether it's your performance, your attitude, something's going to not really be there, and people are going to notice. And that's just something where I believe in, have one speed and that's go. I know that's kind of Charlie Sheen or whatever, but just go and do it. Have intention, be purposeful. And I think that's a really big lesson that I try to give to not only my clients, but just when I do keynote speaking, when I do, any of the motivational stuff that I do, it's you have to have full intention and purpose, or you're just going to be spinning your tires and not going anywhere. And that doesn't get anything productive done for anybody.
Exactly. They say character is doing something the same way, putting that effort in when no one's watching.
Yeah.
And that's what you need to get, we were talking about that a little bit in the break, get up to, like Shayne did, the top 0.0001% of a field that's very difficult. You have to have that mindset. You have to be motivated. That's you talked about tanking, Shayne, and how players never tank, and I always believed that to be true. Because I remember that being a discussion 2 or 3 years ago when the Dolphins were having kind of almost a historically bad season. There was issues with the coaching, that the organization was kind of falling apart at the seams, and there were people on ESPN and other platforms making allegations, former players even, saying that these players were tanking. And not only one, I don't think that their motivation and their character and all of that would allow them to do that. 2, it would be flat dangerous to tank in specifically the NFL. You could do it in other sports, but it would be dangerous in the NFL. And then 3, that Dolphins team started to tick up by the end of the season too. So the allegations of tanking, they were winning games they shouldn't have with guys that were maybe at the edge of the 53-man roster or on the practice squad or on another team's practice squad or off the street. And those guys, to your point, Shayne, earned jobs by being on a team that was quote unquote tanking. They of course weren't tanking, but a team that wasn't headed to the playoffs, that wasn't going anywhere that year. They got jobs maybe with the Dolphins, but with other teams by playing their hardest and taking advantage of that opportunity.
Yeah, and when you put something, what we would say, put it on paper, that's your resume. And that is your body of work. And if you're a race car and everyone sees that the car's not going very fast, well, no one's going to want to drive that car anymore. No one's going to want to have that driver, or whatever the case may be. You want something that has a reputation. You want something that has reliability. And when you see inconsistency like that, I think with management, with coaches, other players, leadership within the players, and you see it as something that will fester, and you see it as a toxic cancer that you want to get away from. And you don't want to take a chance, not only of if you're playing lazy or you're playing a little behind step. 1, you might get hurt, you might get injured. 2, you're risking your career, and it's just not worth it, in my opinion.
No, there's so many things to play for. So that's what the Lions have this week. Well, these Lions players, Bears players, both sides, and then the rest of the league. They're always playing for a lot. So when somebody like me sitting on their couch says, "Oh yeah, well no, they're not. They're giving up. They're never giving up," because like Shayne said, that could get you hurt or end your career, and it's a very lucrative potential career. So that you're never going to have motivation for that. But it's an interesting discussion. We're going to take a quick break and come back and close out the show and have a little bit more discussion here. So stick with us. You're listening to Shayne Graham's Extra Points on Jethro FM. Coming back, having a good conversation about kind of the motivations of the NFL and the players here. But yeah, I'm curious to see how this game goes here, Shayne, with the Bears and Lions, because there's so many storylines. I think at the beginning of the season we were all hoping, well, at least I was, that it was going to be. I mean, it was close to being for the division. If a couple of those games went differently for the Lions, because we didn't go into this as much as I wanted to with Josh Helmer, but he's got a good article on this on Lions Wire, so go check it out. But there's a lot of metrics to the fact, because people say, well, the Lions underperformed, they're 8-8, but there's a lot of metrics to the fact that whether it's expected win totals, DVOA, which is a good measure of your defensive performance and how it should have shaken out, they're 2 wins, I think, above where they're below where they were supposed to be. The Bears are a couple wins above what they were supposed to be. Now, there's a lot of things that factor into that. It doesn't mean they should have lost. It means that they were good in some of those clutch situations. The Bears have shown that all year. They've won several games right at the final bell, and that's a testament to Caleb Williams and Ben Johnson and a lot of the other guys there. But at the same time, these are 2 teams that were pretty close. But as you made a good point about this, I think in the Helmer interview, about how the ball has 2 sides to it and it can bounce 2 different ways. And the Lions are one side of that this year and the Bears are the other side. And the Lions want to get it so they can get that ball bouncing back to them next year. And you can do a lot in this game to set yourself up for that.
You know, and that's the funny thing about the NFL is, yeah, there's going to be some talent that stands out here and there, but everybody on every single team is the best in the world to a degree of what they do. And so the parity is going to run pretty even with just a few little anomalies here and there, and those are the teams that, you know, create better culture and, you know, who know with the play calling and a couple players standing out. But there are so many games in the NFL that you could flip a coin and just have no idea who's going to win. I think that's why the average point margin might be a little over 3 points.
Probably something
mistaken.
Like that, yeah.
It's I know it's a 1-score average point margin of victory in the NFL, and that's why things could really go either way in any situation, no matter how good a team is doing or how bad a team is doing on that day. You know, any given Sunday, as they say, it can really just go one way or the other.
Exactly. I mean, it's just such an interesting game overall, and that's why it's nice to have you in here to be able to study the nuances of it, because one of the things that kind of aggravates me as far as the radio market side of things, and we're seeing this come out with the 8-8 Lions, is because now I have a lot of people in my life that'll say, oh, well, I listened to this other show and they were talking about this in the radio market. And there's so much negativity that comes out of being even just 8-8, which isn't bad. That's exactly 500. There's a lot of factors, like we talked about, that factor into that. But and you've talked before, Shayne, about kind of having to block this stuff out, and you guys don't listen to the media, nor should you. I mean, that really shouldn't factor in. I think there is something to be said for being part of the media that is understanding of the player side, where I've always leaned that way, and you being on the show now has helped me do that more. But I think there's a reason that players have a little bit of a distrust of the media, because some guy that could never kick an extra point, let alone a 50-yard field goal under a ton of pressure, or handle a drop back as a quarterback, or whatever the different position is, will stand there and say, oh, well, he's got to do better. The coach has got to be fired. And people have been firing Dan Campbell all year. There's a lot of people that want Ben Johnson back instead of Dan Campbell. A lot of silly things get said that are very short-sighted. But I like on this show that we look at kind of some of the things that are the root causes of a lot of this stuff and then try to explain it and then move forward in a positive way versus, okay, let's fire everybody. That's easy and also not productive in any sort of way.
Yeah, and there's always going to be impulse decisions made, and sometimes people are trigger happy, and just, you know, sometimes it's a little bit of CYA, you know, like sometimes management or, you know, executive or front office or whatever, they're going to cover their own tails because something's got to happen, and someone above them wants answers. So they're like, well, I don't know what to do, so I'm going to do something. And sometimes that's making a fire or making a personnel change, or, you know, as they like to tell us when they were letting us go, and you were not going to make the team, we're going to go in another direction. I think sometimes those things aren't always the right decision, but that's just how it works. And unfortunately, when you have a losing season, you have a lot more of those impulse decisions that happen because someone's trying to cover their own tail so they don't get fired.
It's a great point because this happens all the time where maybe there's a lot of circumstances that happen that make the job very difficult for the head coach, but and a lot of it could involve personnel and different things, but the general manager isn't always going to go, oh, this one's on me, you know, let me fire myself. There's not a lot of general managers that will fire themselves, but they'll get rid of coaches, or coaches will get rid of downline coaches, and that may happen this year with the Lions. They lost both coordinators last year. We were hoping for some continuity this year, but Morton was obviously relieved of the play calling duties. He was still on the team and part of the mix, but then you have Kelvin Shepard, who Campbell wouldn't necessarily commit to either. But we also have, in addition to the Lions Chicago game that we'll be watching, there's also a couple key games that'll be basically for the division or for playoff rankings. You got the big time Sunday night game with Seattle and San Francisco. You've got the Carolina Tampa game that'll be for the division. One of those teams, they're about at the same place as the Lions as far as record goes, but one of those teams is going to make the playoffs and host a game here. So some of it, talking about the way the things bounce, some of it is about what division you play in. This is a tough division, the NFC North. The South wasn't quite as good this year, but I'm curious if you have any, because you obviously bounced around the league a little bit. Were you in, I think I can think of one or two situations potentially in your career, were you in a game like that where you were playing to play into the playoffs at the last game of the season?
Yeah, quite a few times actually. And, you know, once or twice we had them go our way, and a few times we had them go the other way. You know, a team that wasn't playing well just comes out and has a great game, and we just weren't running on all cylinders. Or we played really well, and it allowed us to be in the position to still have a chance. And then sometimes you got to have something else happen. Another team has to lose or something like that, and that sometimes can be a thing as well. But that's always where, you know, coaches say, like, we like to be in charge of our own destiny. We'd rather have taken care of business and made our hay when we can, so that we're not pressuring and pushing ourselves unrealistically at the very end, because, you know, no one really wants to be in that position. But if you get there, you deal with it. You just have to not treat it as if it's a something to lose situation. I always tell guys when I hear this phrase, they're playing with nothing to lose. When I hear coaches say that, they usually get it right, and then they keep going a little too far, and I don't like that. If you play with nothing to lose, you're dangerous. That means you're not hesitating. You're pulling all the punches. You're playing aggressive. As soon as you say the other team is playing with nothing to lose, so we better be careful. I've heard coaches say, so we better be careful. No, that's the worst thing. Then we need to play like we have nothing to lose as well. That's the only way to do it, because if you play with nothing to lose, you're not going to second guess yourself and hesitate and create doubt within your decision making, instead of just playing on your instincts and calling the calls you're going to call and making the steps you're going to make for your techniques and all the things you do. You have to look at every single one of them as, I don't care if that game you lose, you're out, and you have something to lose. You have to play it like you have nothing to lose, and you're not afraid of the result of what could happen, so that you can actually play through the process of controlling the result.
Exactly. You have to match the ferocity there, because I feel like we have a ton of examples of this in sports, not just football, but all sports, where the teams that pull back and get too conservative, even in the gameplay. Oh, okay, I've got the lead. Let's just run the ball. Let's just lay back. That's usually not a good strategy. I don't have to be a former football coach and player to know that, like yourself. You see that all the time, that you pulling back doesn't usually have a benefit there.
I don't think football's got a version of the Dean Smith four corners offense. That's probably the only way it was ever successful, and the shot clock obviously got rid of that. But in football, when you start seeing the play calling becoming very cautious, it usually doesn't work well. I mean, there's a reason why there's a higher success rate. I'm not sure. I'd have to look this up. But I've always felt like when teams run their 2-minute offense, that they're usually pretty dang good at it for the most part. And I always said, why don't we run every play like it's your 2-minute offense, and let's try to catch the other team off guard. Let's just throw our best plays at them, and the ones that we know are going to work, and just go. And sometimes when I see a little over calculation, I think there's a phrase, I'm blanking on it right now. Something about over something. I'm really blanking on it right now, so I feel bad about that. But I think when you overanalyze,
paralysis by
analysis.
There you go. Good job, Dan.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. I was brain. Oh boy. Okay. I think when you create that paralysis because you're just overthinking everything, it creates a problem instead of just like, hey, here's our plan, go. And I think that's the best way to do it.
And I think we're seeing that in the NFL. There's a lot of teams that are starting to realize, okay, wait, why don't we play with pace we don't have to wait till the 2-minute drill to start moving the plays faster, as long as we can get them in. So yeah, it's a good point. Great discussion as usual. We'll have more discussions here next week with Rob Huff, Al Karsten, and Eric Kramer, as mentioned. Want to thank our guests, Josh Helmer and Robert Bondy. Thanks to Dan for keeping us on track, and thanks to Shayne for all the great conversations here. Want to thank our sponsors, Encore Business Group, Eric Hall Aesthetic and General Dentistry, Williams Chiropractic, Elite Winning Solutions, and Sales Complete Home Painting and Handyman Services. Be sure to tune in next week from 7 to 9 and kick it with Shayne and I. Have a great week and Happy New Year.